Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Sue Wilt. I'm with TIU 11, and I'm the moderator for this morning's session. I'll let Gretchen and Eric introduce themselves and their program. I would just like to ask you to stay muted, and they will instruct you on how to answer the questions, or excuse me, how to ask questions. This is being recorded and will be available at a later time on the PA Adult Ed Resources website. And I guess take it away, Eric and Gretchen.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sue.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Gretchen Spencer. I am the Director of Adult Education at Providence Center. So I run our adult ESOL classes as well as the adult ESOL classes for Temple Life, which is where Eric is from.
So hello, everyone. My name is Eric. I am the program coordinator for a research grant at Temple University's College of Education and Human Development. It's called the Transforming School Life program. It's a rather large grant, but we focus on helping the school district of Philadelphia engage in what we know as multilingual student equity. So just trying to make the schools in the school district a little bit better for multilingual students. And I'm also a teacher at Providence Center with Gretchen.
So we'll give you a little bit of background on the idea of both our programs as well as the digital literacy curriculum and kind of where it came from. So like most programs, when the pandemic hit, we had to switch immediately from our normal in-person classes to entirely virtual classes. The immediate challenge was to help our students transfer those social norms of physical classrooms into a digital space. We also wanted our teachers to include more creativity and critical thinking and communicative language teaching, not just PowerPoints, because in the first weeks or so after that switch to the virtual classroom, we noticed that it was sort of devolving into that. So we decided that for students to really get that critical, self-reflective classroom, there needed to be an emphasis on technology as a facilitator when they were learning, as opposed to just a tool that they were looking at. We also wanted it to be relevant for all of our different programs. So both Providence Center, which is general survival English for the Philadelphia community, as well as Temple Life, which is more focused on parents for the school district of Philadelphia. So to do all of this, I asked Eric to create a digital literacy curriculum that all of our teachers and programs would be able to use. So in the process of both creating it and in experiencing the pandemic and crafting that virtual classroom, we noticed that while our lower level students needed to learn to use technology because they couldn't access the Zoom features, for example, our high level students already knew the technology, so they needed to use technology to engage in that learning. So here's where the differentiation comes in. Differentiation is learning activities, lesson plans, curriculums that acknowledge and adjust for differences in learner background, learner level, all of it. So that allows us to take what we have, take a lesson or an activity, and prepare it both for Providence Center's Survival English, Temple Life's school district, or for beginners, for advanced speakers, all at once using the same tools.
So I guess to start, we wanted to go into a little bit of theory, and at risk of diving into this too deeply, because I could talk about this for a long time, I don't want to do that to everyone. We're just going to talk about a kind of baseline framework for a pedagogy of what is known as multiliteracies. And for me, my eyes are immediately drawn on this slide to the graphic, so we're going to start with the graphic. fundamentally, what we're looking at on the outer ring is the idea of multimodal or multimodality. A dictionary definition would be conveying meaning in multiple modes, but for example, this slide itself is an example of something that's multimodal, right? We're making sense of things on the left with text, and on the right we have some more visual things. So if you're drawn to the visual, you could look at the graphic more. If you're drawn to the text, you could look at the text more and read. So it's this outer ring appreciating multimodality. So it's engaging and learning through different ways, right? And we have that inner ring of mode of meaning. And these are just design elements that we find with a lot of things. We have maybe an audio clip. We have some spatial design, right? Maybe we have some graphics, or we have gestural design, maybe learning language through gestures, which is obviously an integral component of speaking. Maybe visual, maybe you're a visual learner, maybe you're a more linguistic learner, you like listening or talking or writing. So it's acknowledging these subjectivities in learning and being able to say, oh, like I'm more of a visual learner, I'm more of an audio learner, I'm more of a tactile learner, and being able to reinforce these different subjectivities. As you can see in the second quote, we're talking about that. So basically, what we're saying is that in today's really fast-moving technological world, how can we create a system of literacy that acknowledges all the different ways that people and our students make sense of the world and use language? And so the modern language classroom we're talking about should embrace an idea drawn up relatively long ago in 1996, but it's still super relevant today. And it's that of linking two things, diversity and multiplicity. So this is what the New London Group termed multiliteracies. So again, going back to diversity and multiplicity. So on one hand, you have diversity in perspective, right? Ability, culture, race, gender, so many different things. And then the other, you have multiplicity. So in that, we now use language in myriad ways, right? So with many different mediums, applications, right? Different things going on the internet, different technologies. And furthermore, we have different types of discourse with those different sources of multimedia, right? So we're speaking differently to each other on the internet as opposed to in real life. So all these different mediums and apps and technology pieces and these systems of discourse coalesce on the internet with the idea of multimodal, or as we more commonly hear, multimedia, which you can see obviously in the graphic right here on the right, like we talked about, with the outer ring encompassing this kind of idea of multimodal, right? So we're using different means like visual, spatial, linguistic, audio to really engage in meaning making. And so with multiliteracies, we as educators are trying to anticipate the complex journey through different mediums and different ways of making sense of the world and different identities and discourses, instead of just pretending that they don't exist. So really, what does that look like? It really means that when we're designing curriculums and lessons, we give students multiple avenues toward achieving meaning and learning in language or otherwise. And we use lots of different tools, right? Hopefully tools on the internet or using technology. And so obviously this is where technology comes into play. Because without this large-scale fracturing of worlds kind of done by the internet and technology, traditional literacy would be much more viable. But now students are not just using text to make sense of the world, right? They're using multimedia, they're using podcasts, they're on social media, right? And they're also interacting with people on the internet through these systems of discourse, through these apps and stuff like that. So what we're trying to do as educators is we're looking to reinforce, again, these subjectivities of learning within our students, right? To reinforce their own learning styles by utilizing technology and using these tools on the internet. And so in sum, like, the internet really gives us a lot to work with. You could watch a video on YouTube to learn about gestures when speaking, like I'm doing now. Or maybe you could listen to a podcast or read an online comic book. So these are all multimodal technological ways of learning. And so the point here is trying to take all these diverse perspectives and learning styles and tie them to the pertinent technological tools to engage in learning. And again, thinking about in a real concrete way, just think about how people talk to each other differently on Twitter or social media as opposed to real life, right? There's a huge difference there. And it's not just learning to use, say, Twitter to reblog or retweet, if you will, which is more technical, but also how do we speak to each other differently online, and how can we prepare our students for that? So let me go to the next slide. So from that kind of broad framework of having students engage in multiliteracies, we have this kind of subset of digital literacy, right? And using tools that are digital. And digital literacy, I'll read from the top little blurb right there. It encompasses not just consuming information, but being able to collaborate with others, critically evaluate the information online, which is a really important skill, and also produce content. So we also have a graphic on the left, but you can look at it's Peyton and Haig's 8 components of digital literacy. And we didn't select all these components. We just kind of cherry picked a couple. And we'll talk more about that as we go through the actual curriculum. But when we're talking about digital literacy, we're not just talking about learning to read and write, right? Again, this is a more traditional idea of literacy, right? You just go to a library, you check out a book, you maybe look at the index. But this is a more complex idea of literacy. So it's in conjunction with this multimodal model of being able to achieve meaning and interact with the text in multiple different ways, right? So nowadays when we read a news article, for instance, and a lot of us don't think about it because it's almost second nature, but there's hyperlinks to texts and there's audio and maybe there's a video. So you're encountering all these different ways of engaging with the text and engaging in meaning making. And so we want to anticipate that with our students and show them how to make sense of it in different ways, which also further reinforces their own subjectivities as a learner. So making sense of all of these takes a degree of literacy that encompasses not just reading, but also watching, listening, and exploring content online. So broadly speaking, digital literacy is not only the ability to consume various types of media online, but also to critically evaluate the media being consumed and having the technological literacy to use the actual piece of technology, right? And knowing even tech terms that we sometimes take for granted, such as download or mouse or bandwidth or PDF, right? So when we're encountering language learners, a lot of the time in our subject area, they don't know what PDF means, maybe, if they're a beginner, for instance. So when we're engaging in digital literacy, students are, again, critically consuming media. They're creating their own content, whether it's a blog or a website, and they're also sharing and collaborating online. Oh, Gretchen, you're on mute.
Oops, there we go. Sorry about that. So with this in mind, and that idea of creating something that will work for everyone and help our students get to use technology safely, well, and for learning, we came up with this digital literacy curriculum. And Eric, if you want to talk a little bit about how it started and then what it came to be.
Yeah. So originally when Gretchen gave me this kind of task, I kind of looked at it from a much more traditional perspective of doing it more content-based. For instance, you know, if you're teaching a history class, you teach specifically about, say, like the Civil Rights Movement or the 1920s or something like that. A lot more content-based, right? But the more I tried to do that, the more difficult it became because when you're engaging in digital literacy, you know, what am I specifically going to teach if I'm teaching content? You know, am I just going to teach maybe how to use Twitter or how to use Facebook, right? There's so many tools that students can use, so many apps, and there's so much out there that I kind of wanted to divorce myself from this tie to content, and Gretchen really advised me and helped me out with this by giving the suggestion of maybe looking at it from a more zoomed out perspective of it really being like a tool to engage in learning and meaning making. So it's less about specific content and more about using digital literacy as like a tool. So one of the things we had was collaboration, which we'll talk more about in our activity, but the idea of not specifically going into a specific like application that facilitates collaboration, but just how can we take the subject matter we're learning about, whether it's mathematics or language learning or whatever, and kind of use it as a tool with collaboration or with staying safe online. And so these ideas of collaborating and critically consuming, so we're trying to zoom out from a perspective and use it almost as like a tool that we could add to any specific content. So it's not entirely content specific, if that makes sense.
Right. So it's a modular based curriculum and it's more of a guideline, as they would say in Pirates of the Caribbean. It's a guideline as opposed to a rule. So teachers would be able to take pieces of it that were helpful and leave the ones that were not. So we're going to dive into our Module 4 or Week 4 example here, which is how can my family and I stay safe online? So we can show you an example of what that module might look like. So for content, you could use to focus on a password. You could talk about healthy online practices. You could talk about online harassment and cyberbullying. For language, you can match those up as well. You can decide what you're really focusing on there as to whether you want to talk about making requests, if you want to use the present tense, if you want to use letters, which I'll go into in just a minute. You can also pick which vocabulary you want, again, depending upon your students and what they need. You could use descriptive adjectives. You could talk about social media terms if you're looking at different online harassment. You can use the cyber terms. You could go with really basic terms like password or more advanced terms like hacker. We also provide sample objectives in each module to give teachers sort of a starting point, a jumping off point. And just so everyone's on the same page, SWABAT means students will be able to produce a secure password, describe digital literacy habits so that they can go backwards from there and decide which of those vocabulary points, which activities are going to be most helpful. The final column there has sample activities, which a lot of our teachers really appreciated because they had resources that they can pull from and add as lesson activities and make the lesson planning a little easier. So going into differentiation, Eric and I are going to talk about how we each took this module 4 and formed a lesson with it. And as you'll see, they're two totally different lessons using the same idea. So for my beginners, I focused on passwords. I decided that I wanted to review letters and numbers with them, particularly the letters, because a lot of my students mix up those letters. I have a lot of Spanish speakers, so A, E, I are a little confusing because they're not the same in Spanish. Passwords allowed me to give that context instead of just having them repeat the letters. So my other objective would be that content of explaining what is a password and giving examples of it. Then having them read and copy a password and listen to get those multimodals in there. And then finally, hopefully they can use a password because it is something they really need. We use it for Zoom, we use it for other Providence Center activities as well. So this is a short example. This is not the entire lesson. I skipped the review part since hopefully all of you are familiar with the alphabet already. So for my students, this is an example activity. We start with something they're already familiar with. That green text on the left is a text that I sent everyone when we first started using Zoom. They already received that text. I knew they already could find the password because they were already on my meeting. So they needed to tell me what the password was in that text that I had shared with them. From there, I'm asking them to offer their own examples. Hopefully they'll come up with things like emails and cell phones. If they don't, I also had pictures to encourage them to find those passwords. And to also look for patterns. What is a password made of? Numbers, letters, punctuation. So I also would get them to read and find a password in an email. I have 2 example emails here. You can notice that the text for the email isn't really different except for the password itself. That's because, again, I'm working with absolute beginners. I don't want to overload them. So they're just looking for the password, but it's still in a context that you really would need to find and write down a password. The part 4 for that would be listening. So I would record someone else saying it, or I would just say out loud various passwords by spelling them or saying the word. This is another really good opportunity for differentiation even within that same lesson, depending on what you want to focus on. So if I wanted them to remember certain basic words like book, I can include that. If they're having trouble with letters like P and B sounds, I can include those to make sure that they're actually getting those letters across. I can also include a couple of things that are fun that they might recognize or not. And I also included one that turns into an exit ticket. So they have to remember at the end of class, time to go, in order to actually leave the class. So they're using that password. Then I'll get them to write their own. I'll give them different rules depending on what I'm focusing on. We're only doing letters. The password only needs letters. If we want to add in that punctuation, they have to add those as well. And they're going to share it with a partner so that they do the same thing that I did with them earlier. They're listening and writing it down for each other.
So here we have another lesson which I did in my class. I have a more intermediate and advanced kind of level of English speakers. So the lesson I wanted to do was staying safe online, kind of tying into that. How can I spot a fake email? So I think we've all received fake phishing emails. I think it's rather important for all people to be able to distinguish what's safe and what's not on email, right? This is a big problem in today's world. So I thought that would be, as far as the objectives we're looking at right now on this slide, the content I wanted to do was recognizing a fake phishing email. And then I had several language points, again, because I have a more intermediate class. One of which was maybe just teaching them vocabulary concerning cybersecurity in a context like a sentence, right? So maybe using hacking or spam or opt-in, opt-out. So a little bit more advanced vocabulary, tech-centered vocabulary. The second point would be using modals of possibility, like I may or I might have gotten a spam message, right? Or I might have been hacked. So using those to produce full sentences. And then the third one was recognizing the rules of subject-verb agreement in English when considering irregular subjects. Excuse me. So maybe collective nouns or compound subjects, stuff like that, again, with more intermediate learners. So the goal here at the bottom is how can I align my pedagogical goals with the technological goals of my students, right? So how can I align the kind of goals I have with my lesson in content with technological kind of goals. So let me go to the next slide. So we kind of started with reviewing background info and activating prior knowledge, right? This is a little screenshot on the left from an app I use called Edpuzzle. It has YouTube videos and you can add questions to them. So it'll pause the video, say whenever you want it, and give the students a question. So we were activating prior knowledge. You know, what do you think the word scammers means? What does a scammer do, right? Discussing prior knowledge, introducing the vocab. And then we reviewed explicit grammar, right? Reviewing language objectives and the grammar, talking about subject-verb agreement. And the third point on this is one way to spot a fake email is looking for grammar mistakes, right? So hackers often, if you notice when you read, if you ever read these fake emails, they often have mistakes in grammar or formatting. And so one of the most common mistakes phishing emails have are subject-verb agreement mistakes. So furthermore, we could kind of differentiate the lesson by varying the degree of difficulty, right, that's required to spot these grammatical errors, right? Maybe you could have an email, and these are easy to find on the internet if you just Google search it. Maybe you could find like a phishing email that has really evident errors in the actual email. It's so easy to see these grammatical errors. And then you have a little bit better hackers, right, who maybe the errors are kind of hard to spot. So you could kind of differentiate by not only to what degree you're teaching subject-verb agreement, maybe you're using really difficult things like collective nouns, but also with the subject matter, those emails at hand. You could be like, okay, like this is an easier to spot phishing email. So kind of going on, right, content and language hopefully, right, align when students look at the grammaticality of fake phishing emails. So again, you could vary the degree of difficulty required to spot these errors, as well as the explicit grammar instruction that you're giving beforehand. So on the left side, you have an example of a phishing email that the students would read over. And so students can read the emails in their groups, and they can look for grammatical emails or grammatical errors. And if you want to differentiate even further, you could maybe say, how would you correct this email to make it grammatically correct, right, for example? And then students present the found errors, right, to the class and discuss, which was a kind of fun thing to do for my students. They were just much more paranoid about email after this lesson. And so the fifth one was having take a phishing quiz online. So there's a quiz online that I found for spotting fake phishing emails as their kind of exit ticket summative assessment. So. Oh, you're on mute, Gretchen.
Sorry, I can't unmute and click every time, then mute it, made it go to a next slide. So now it's your turn. We're going to put you into breakout groups, ask you to work with your group to develop objectives and maybe some potential activities for our second module. What are some ways to collaborate with others online? Eric is going to put these guiding questions and a picture of this section of the curriculum before we get to our groups so that you'll be able to have it when you are discussing. We're asking our odd number groups to create objectives for beginners, absolute basic learners, and our even number groups to create lessons for intermediate learners. Some guiding questions for you as you think about this. How can your students use technology to learn? How can your students learn to use technology? What different mediums can you use? And how can technology amplify collaboration and language acquisition? So we'll also jump back and forth between those groups. This is going to work. Let's see. Stop sharing for a moment. All right. So please click join when you can. All right. I think we have everyone back more or less. So I'll keep this share screen off for a moment so we can see each other's faces for the discussion. Does anyone want to share what your group came up with, either observations, activities, lessons?
So I was in group 4, and well, I was in a couple groups, but I ended up in group 4, and we were talking about using objectives that are just about amplifying collaboration by using apps or technology and stuff like that. So using online tools to hopefully get a better quality of interaction, have students make sense of things just in a general kind of sphere of collaboration.
Hi, this is Chuck. Our group, we had some really good discussion. We shared a couple of resources that some of the folks used that they felt were really good for supporting like collaboration between students. One in particular, Jamboard. It's a Google product that can be really good for group work and like group projects and things like that. But then we also kind of morphed into a discussion about how to being concerned about overwhelming with both the teachers and the students with too much or too many new things, and just really making sure that teachers are selecting tools that have a purpose and not just, hey, I just heard about this really cool thing, I have to figure out a way to incorporate this into my class, whether it fits or not, to revolve the instruction around the tool instead of selecting the tool that really fits the instructional needs. So I thought that was really good insight from everybody that was commenting on that.
That's a great point. And it's one of the reasons we included those objectives, like suggestions in the curriculum. For me personally, I always like to start with the objective and then figure out what needs to be done to get them there.
Oh, perfect. Yep. Okay, thanks.
Did anyone else have anything else to add? And of course, if you don't wish to speak on camera, we can certainly type in Zoom chat as well.
Oh, yes. We have technology.
So yeah, that goes, right. I have to remind myself again with divorcing myself from the more traditional classroom and having, again, multiple ways of them interacting, right? So I mentioned in one group that I have some students that are all about chat. They're always in chat answering questions, but they don't want to talk. So everyone's different.
We talked about that as well in the group that I was part of, that a lot of students are familiar with WhatsApp, for example. So if you do things on a tool they're familiar with, they're really good at it and can communicate rapidly. But then try and transfer the same thing to Zoom and they get very uncomfortable. So there's that, using the two apps together to sort of compare. We also talked a lot about share screen and how that can, for basic learners, help build up to other things. Because then once they can share their screen, they can share what they're typing if they do email practice or something like that. Just basically for beginners, taking it one small step at a time, thinking about what everything is involved. For example, when I asked about vocabulary, some people came up with really good suggestions that you need not just like click, but also if you're doing directions, maybe the left side, the top side of your screen. Those are other language objectives that they need before they can actually understand you.
Yes, that's great in chat, right? I haven't used ReadWorks. I have to look into that. And learners recording themselves on the topic, right? Those are great.
Yeah, thank you everyone for sharing, and feel free to continue sharing in the chat. For the sake of time, I'm going to pull this back up for now. And we will, Chuck might need to help us with this one, but we will share the actual curriculum itself with all of you if we can. If not, I'll put my email and Eric can put his in the chat and you can just contact us directly for it.
Hey, Gretchen, this is Chuck. Not to put you on the spot or anything, but if you guys are comfortable, what we plan to do is post the recordings of the session and like any supporting materials. So like if you're comfortable sharing the PowerPoint and if the curriculum would lend itself to this, we have like a conference webpage that has like the links for all of the session and the descriptions. And then we thought we would post recordings and supporting materials on that website. So if you'd be comfortable with your curriculum being shared on something like that, then that would be amazing. But I understand if you don't want to just have it out there for anybody either. So, but we can talk about that. But that's just one of the things we're thinking about. If you know you're comfortable with that right off the top of your head, then we can let people know. But otherwise, we'll just figure out about the best way to get it out there.
Yeah, that sounds good. I think, Eric, do you agree with that one?
Yeah, I'm certainly comfortable with it.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So we also, having created this curriculum and used it, wanted to make sure, does it actually work? Did we do what we kind of planned to? So we did a quick survey of both our students and our teachers, asking them about different curriculum aspects on just a simple Likert scale, strongly disagree to strongly agree. Eric, if you want to talk about the students.
Yeah, so this is our student survey or data from our student survey. We have student perspectives. We're calling these foundations. So these are really foundational questions we ask about, can you participate in a virtual class, right? Is technology important to you? Do you know more about using technology, smartphones, what have you, because of the English class you're taking? Or did you already know about it before you started taking the class? And we have a lot of agree here, a lot of strongly agree. You can see the green and blue. So this is kind of not a surprise when students, sign up for a virtual class. They, usually already know how to use technology because they're signing up for said thing. But just interesting to know about whether it helped them, right? And we did have a bunch of people agreeing that it did help them because of the English class. We had 2 disagree that it didn't. But just in general, knowing that, I think one of the most important things is the second question, which everyone agreed that using technology and the internet was important for them, regardless of what they were doing or what profession they were in. And then a little bit about perspectives. This is using technology, student perspectives. We have a quote on the right side. The first question being, can you use Zoom features, right? Can you mute and unmute yourself? Can you go into chat? Can you use technology independently? Can you define and use advanced digital vocabulary, right? Can you talk about opinion versus fact? Can you engage in stuff like lateral reading, right? Checking the noteworthiness or trustworthiness of a website. Can you define and use common digital vocabulary, right? Parts of computers, PDF, mouse, that kind of stuff. We had a lot of students say that pretty much all of them can use Zoom features. Again, definitely a good thing because they're taking classes online. But we had problems initially before we developed this with teachers. Some students couldn't use the Zoom features. So now we have that. And then just using technology independent outside of class. We had a couple neutral, but most, again, students recognize the importance of it. A little bit more interesting with defining and using advanced digital vocab, right? We had a lot of neutral there. Students still feel a bit unsure. And defining and using common and digital vocabulary, we had a lot of positivity there. Students saying that they can, talk about them, they know what they are. And the quote on the right, obviously interesting, students enjoying those kind of online digital classes, right? Because we have a student here that allows them to engage in digital learning and still do family duties, right? And then lastly, for the student perspectives, we have our digital literacy skills, right? So our 4 areas of focus on the right were finding information that's trustworthy, fostering online safety, collaborating, and technological prowess. So teaching them how to use the apps, teaching them how to stay safe, teaching them how to find good information. And just on the graph, we can see finding information and resources on the school district website. So we have a lot of students that are parents. They have kids in the school district of Philadelphia, so we thought it would be very important to have them be able to use the website, which can be, if you've used it, a little bit difficult, a little bit like a labyrinth. And then, so we had a lot of students agree that they can use it now. Identifying facts and opinions and seek out reliable sources online, a little bit more interesting there. We had a little bit of disagree, a little bit of neutral, and then identifying misinformation and digital security threats. We had a lot more neutral there. Obviously, that can be a difficult thing for most of us in today's world, especially identifying misinformation. But on the bottom, we have a lot more strongly agree and agree. Completing basic online tasks like using and sending or receive email properly, and using Google Docs and collaborating online. Just important to use those kind of baseline pieces of technology to be able to navigate and talk to people on the web.
So for teachers, we asked very similar questions. We started with ease of use because we wanted this to be a tool that was helpful and not something that was causing more problems instead. Thankfully, that big red disagree is whether it was time consuming. So good news, it's not. The resources, whether they were accessible, we had strongly agreed to neutral. So resources were definitely the big thing when we asked teachers for their perspective and what they liked about it and what they wanted was resources. So those activities. And at the bottom of our curriculum, which we didn't get to show today, is just a list of the resources, the web pages, the different activities for people to use. That was the biggest one that people liked. Whether the content objectives, it was kind of neutral to agree. Same thing with whether it was easy to use or not. So nobody disagreed, but there was some neutrality there. And the quote over on the left, you can sort of see where that's coming from. We wanted to be totally honest with you and give you both the neutral perspective as well as the positive. So one of our teachers said that it was hard to integrate digital literacy into their teaching. So sometimes if they were required to have that digital literacy component, they would end up splitting their lesson into 2 sections about 2 different topics. But again, they really liked the web pages and the sources that were in the curriculum so that they could actually create the lesson and just pop them in when they were needed. And I asked the teachers the same questions about the specific components, whether they thought students were able to complete those basic tasks. Could they use Zoom? Could they use technology? As you can see from our little chart there with all the green and blue, the basics, whether they could do basic tasks and if they could use Zoom, everyone said, yes, they can. It was if they can use independently, people weren't sure about, which is partially because that is much more difficult to observe. They might just not know. So the neutral line there is possibly no, possibly we have no idea because we couldn't see their outside of class resources. Same with advanced digital vocabulary. Not everyone studied that, depending on what their level was. But most people agreed they were able to use digital and to participate in class, which was our biggest goal. On the left side, again, you can see that the students responded to social media, especially when the teacher shifted it to being about their kids. So making those things relevant was really helpful and important. And quality of emails, which is something I know a couple of the groups discussed, getting those emails from students that are all caps or texting or something like that. So just getting better emails from them is nice as well. We did also ask teachers about specific modules such as collaboration or internet safety. I haven't included that chart here because it was very big, but they all agreed that the students were able to complete the tasks once they completed those modules. And that is the end of our full presentation here. If you have any questions, I think we have plenty of time, about 10 minutes. I can also go back to any sections if you would like to see them again, and I'll put our contact information in the chat.
Well, thank you guys very much. That was a nice session. That was very interesting. Looking forward to seeing the full curriculum just to see what it looks like. I think that's something that's really going to be popular and helpful.
I can
thank you.
I can share that too. I think I have it up here. There we go. Is everyone able to see that?
Yes.
Awesome. This is what the full thing looks like. We have, I believe, 6 weeks. 5, I was wrong. So each week has a different topic. We started with absolute basics using Zoom or Google Meet controls, depending on your platform. Second week, collaboration. Third week, finding information. So that's like search engines, translation. Family safety online. And the last one was for the School District of Philadelphia, specifically because, as we said, Temple Life is focused on that. And the district website is a bit of a maze. So getting students to use that was really useful.
Oh, okay. It's
And
interesting.
at the bottom, those are our links for different activities.
Cool. Yeah, that's really nice. Somebody mentioned there, as a math teacher, if they have a lot in common digitally. So
Good to know, yeah.
all right. Well, I think not sure.
Yeah, thank you, Gretchen and Erica. That was great. How long did it take you to develop that curriculum?
Forget. Hours? Many hours?
I was thinking weeks.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. Weeks, hours over weeks. You know what I mean? I would put in work hours over, I think it was from November last year to January, something around that time period. So around 2 months, something like that.
With a
Yeah, that was great. Very well organized.
Thank you.
including that one where I said, this is great, but we got to change it.
Always start with the positive. This is great, but
Yes. Gotta have the critical sandwich.